People are rioting again on the streets of Greece. More than 100,000 people reportedly took to the streets today to protest budget cuts. Look at this video, though, to see what it actually looks like. So you can see that this is violent. That guy was on fire, literally. You can see him running by on fire. So this is what is going on the streets of Greece today. Also, Spain was downgraded 2 notches. Moody's is hinting that France's credit rating may be at risk. A German bond auction failed. Europe banned credit default swap trading and hopes that the European Union summit this weekend will deliver a plan to tackle the debt crisis and fears of contagion, of course, have certainly not been realized yet. So it appears the Eurozone debt crisis is nowhere near out of the woods. And with some of Europe's biggest banks on the line, could we be heading towards a banking crisis? And could contagion ripple across the U.S.? That is the big question. Meanwhile, there are plenty of signs that U.S. banks, bailed out by taxpayers in Washington 3 years ago, aren't doing so hot anyway. From accounting gimmicks to risky assets, could some U.S. banks still be teetering too close to the edge, regardless of Europe? Here to help us figure all of this out is Reggie Middleton. He's an investor and analyst. He also writes at boombustblog.com. He called the housing crash. He called the collapse of Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers. He's been harping on the crisis in the Eurozone banking system for years now, so he's just the guy to talk to. He joins us from New York. Thanks for being here, Reggie.
Thank you.
So we keep hearing new hopes, new excitement that a big plan will be hatched to save the Eurozone debt crisis. That crisis hasn't been resolved as of yet. So our question is, are we going to see a Lehman-type moment with European banks?
Well, we're probably going to see a Lehman ×4 moment. Lehman was one bank, relatively small. The European banks have the same essential problem that Lehman Brothers does, or did. It's just that there are so many of them. They're all teetering on the brink. And to be absolutely honest, the only solution to the problem is the politically unfeasible solution, and that's debt destruction. The only way for things to move forward is for the debt to be destroyed and for those who own the debt to take significant losses. The problem is, if you do that, you destroy the banks who carry the debt on a leveraged basis on their balance sheet. And that's basically the only way out of it. What I've been seeing in the media are basically game playing and political politics run amok, trying to use more debt to solve an indebted situation, trying to use financial engineering to solve a problem that was caused by financial engineering. The only way out of this is for the debt to be destroyed. And if the debt is destroyed, banks are carrying a leverage basis, the banks have to go bust.
So
it's going to cost everybody to the United States. Go ahead.
I want to get to all of that, but I want to talk. You're saying this is going to be Lehman ×4. You say the actual solution is politically totally infeasible. So where do we see this start? Where do banks start to go down? And when do we see this start to happen?
I think if you pay close attention, you've probably seen it already. You've had an implicit run on the French banks. There are a lot of institutional counterparties who've been pulling support out of the French banks. They've already pulled liquidity out of the Greek banks. And the German banks are now suspects, such as Deutsche Bank. You're also seeing it in the United States as well. United States banks, U.S. banks have written the vast majority of the credit default swaps against Europe, and the counterparties against these credit default swaps see that the banks who actually wrote the other side of the contract just aren't solvent. So what they requested was to have the credit default swaps and other derivatives moved from the risky part of the bank into the depositors part of the bank, the FDIC insured portion of the banks. So what you have essentially is the taxpayer unwittingly backstopping all the CDS that was written against the European banks. Of course, they're not aware of it, so next time you go and put a check into your savings account, realize that you are probably funding a risky CDS bet against the insolvent European banks.
So you're saying you're saying that U.S. taxpayers are on the line for CDSs, insurance against a Europe banking system or a Europe bank failure, against the Eurozone debt crisis. So what happens to that U.S. taxpayer if this all collapses?
What is interesting, the Bank of America Bank of America, Lynch Countrywide, transferred, I think, over $50 trillion of notional derivatives into their deposit holding bank institution. If I'm not mistaken, the derivative counterparties get first grabs of that. So the depositors actually are second in line to the derivative counterparties, as I understand it. So they have a problem because if things ought to go awry, and they definitely are, because the CDS were written against what I consider insolvent institutions. The depositors are actually going to have to clamor for second place after the derivative counterparties get first.
So you're saying, I just want to clarify. So you're saying that taxpayers are not first to get paid back, that investors in these derivatives are first to get paid back?
Exactly, as I understand it. Now, the FDI, if I would think that regulators should be saying, hell no, basically, absolutely not. But now all the regulators are saying it. Actually, from my understanding, Dr. Bernanke at the Federal Reserve is in favor of this to take pressure off of the bank holding company, while the FDIC, which is the entity that's actually going to have to pay to ensure the depositors, is against it. This is a raping of the taxpayer from my perspective. Of course, is my opinion, but my opinions are strong if you follow the blog. Very few taxpayers, when they opened up their checking or savings account or put money in a CD, anticipated that they'd be backstopping derivative transactions in the form of credit default swaps against European banks who leveraged up against Greek bonds, despite the fact that particular country has defaulted several times in the past.
I bet most U.S. taxpayers do not realize they are second in line once again to investors. We're out of time. I just want to know very quickly if you can predict, does this come before the end of the year where we see a Lehman-type bank collapse in Europe?
Very difficult to predict the timing.
Okay.
One guarantee is it's going to happen. The key is you have a lot of very powerful entities attempting to kick the can down the road. So it all depends how good their soccer shot is.
All right.
If they make it a good shot, it might be past the year.
Depends on how far it goes, but you're saying it is not going to score a goal. Thank you so much for being on the show. That was Reggie Middleton, investor and analyst.